They told the ton she was an invalid. They told her sisters she was too delicate for society. They told everyone a lie, because the truth was far more dangerous. At Larkspur Hall, before the household stirred, Marigold Fenchurch rode like a woman pursued by her own fate. Skirts hitched indecently above her boots, hair loosed from its pins, laughing into the wind as though scandal itself could not catch her. It nearly did. A carriage, overturned in the lane, wheels splintered against a fallen elm, a stranger standing over it, greatcoat torn, knuckles bloodied from prying a trapped groom free, and eyes the color of storm glass, fixed on her as though she were the only solid thing in a world gone suddenly sideways. "You ride," he said, breathless, as though you have never once been told no. "I haven't," she answered, swinging down before her groom could object. "Not successfully, at least." He laughed, a startled, unguarded sound, as if laughter were a language he had forgotten he spoke. Neither of them yet knew his name carried a crown behind it. Neither of them yet knew her family had spent 6 years burying her like a secret too costly to confess. But the wind knew, the frost-bitten fields knew, and somewhere beneath the wreckage of his carriage, fate had already begun rearranging itself. Before we continue, do one small thing for Marigold. For 6 years, everyone in her life chose silence when she needed someone to stand beside her. If you believe a woman should never be punished for speaking the truth, subscribe now and join her journey. Let's see how many people are willing to stand with her this time. 6 years earlier, Marigold Fenchurch had done the unthinkable. She had stood in the middle of a crowded ballroom and called her betrothed a coward to his face, in front of 300 witnesses, for the crime of striking a stable boy who could not strike back. She had been right. She had also been ruined. Her father, Viscount Fenchurch, a man who measured his daughter's worth by the marriages they secured rather than the courage they possessed, had not forgiven her for trading the family's reputation for her own conscience. While her younger sister Honora was paraded through London drawing rooms in search of a husband, Marigold was quietly relocated to Larkspur Hall in Hampshire and given a new, convenient malady. Weak lungs, a nervous constitution, anything but the truth. For 6 years, she had kept her family's accounts in secret, better than the steward, though no one dared admit it, studied the stars through a smuggled telescope, and ridden at dawn when no one could witness how thoroughly undelicate she truly was. She had made peace with being hidden. She had not made peace with Crown Prince Alaric von Hesselmoor arriving at her door 3 days later, bearing an apology, a broken pocket watch, and a request, insistence really, that she teach him to ride as fearlessly as she did. Her father saw a prince, and a possible salvation for the family name. Alaric saw a woman nobody else had bothered to truly look at. Marigold saw, for the first time in 6 years, the terrifying possibility of being seen, and the question of whether she was brave enough to let herself be found. Larkspur Hall had never moved so fast for any visitor. Not for bishops, not for magistrates, not even the year a fire nearly took the East Wing. But a prince, Viscount Fenchurch had decided, warranted a different species of urgency entirely. "Take off the riding habit," her father hissed through Marigold's door, "and put on the blue silk. Immediately. The blue silk has a seam open at the shoulder. Then pin it shut with your teeth if you must. But be downstairs in a quarter hour looking like a young lady, and not like something dragged in from the stable yard." She came down in 19 minutes, hair only half tamed, color still high from her ride, and found Crown Prince Alaric von Hesselmoor standing in her family's modest drawing room as though it were the most fascinating room he had ever entered, which, given the gilded palaces he'd no doubt grown bored of, she suspected said more about her than the wallpaper. "Your Highness," she said, sinking into the correct depth of curtsy, voice flat, with practiced indifference. "How fortunate that your carriage wheel chose our lane to fail in." "Fortunate," he agreed, gray eyes glinting with something far too close to amusement. "Though I confess, I came today less to thank your family, and more to discover whether you'd survived our encounter without being permanently confined for impropriety." Her father's laugh came out strangled. "Miss Fenchurch has been recovering from a delicate constitution for some years, Your Highness. She rarely rides at all." "Is that so?" Alaric did not look away from her. "How strange, then, that she rode well enough this morning to outpace my coachman's team before breakfast." Viscount Fenchurch's face drained of color. Marigold met the prince's gaze, and understood, with a small, dangerous thrill that this man was not going to let her family's careful fiction stand undisturbed. His Highness, her father said too quickly, will be remaining in Hampshire a full fortnight, overseeing matters of trade with the crown. A fortnight. 14 days of this man watching her with eyes that already saw too much. Marigold was not at all certain whether to be afraid or merely undone. Her father's edict was simple: remain unseen, unremarkable, and unembarrassing for the length of the prince's stay. Marigold obeyed it precisely as she had obeyed every instruction given to her in the last 6 years, by appearing to comply while doing exactly as she pleased the moment no one was looking, which was how, 4 mornings later, she found Alaric already in the stable yard, greatcoat dark with mist, scratching her mare's nose as though they were old confederates. "You're meant to be overseeing trade matters," she said, startled into honesty. "I am overseeing this." He nodded at the horse. "She has remarkable manners. I suspect she learned them from someone equally remarkable and equally disinclined to admit it. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you, by your father's account. Yet here we both are." He studied her, unhurried, the way one might study a puzzle box before deciding which panel concealed the latch. "I've heard whispers, Miss Fenchurch, about a scandal, about a broken engagement some years past, and a family suddenly eager to misplace a daughter." Her chest went tight and cold. "Whispers are rarely accurate." "Then correct mine. I owe you no accounting of my history, Your Highness." "No," he agreed quietly. "You don't. But I find I want it regardless." A pause, his voice lowering into something almost gentle. "I intend to learn the truth of you, Marigold Fenchurch, with your help if you'll give it, without it if you won't." She swung onto her mare without a mounting block, putting both height and distance between them. "Then I wish you luck, Your Highness." 6 years of silence is a formidable opponent. She rode away before he could answer, pulse hammering, not entirely from fear. Behind her, she did not see the slow, deliberate smile spreading across his face, nor the quiet word he murmured to her abandoned groom. "Saddle mine as well. I find I've developed a sudden interest in riding lessons." The dinner had been arranged with excruciating care. The good silver, the good wine, Honora seated where her bright laughter would land squarely in the prince's notice. Marigold had been placed, deliberately, at the table's farthest and dimmest corner. Alaric moved the place card himself before the soup arrived. "Your Highness," her father said, voice strained with the effort of not objecting. "Miss Fenchurch's conversation tends toward the unconventional." "Good," Alaric said. "I find conventional conversation induces a sort of slow death." Beside Marigold, Lord Garrick Bramwell, invited specifically, she suspected, in hopes of finally disposing of her, leaned close enough that his wine-soured breath disturbed her composure more than his words. "A pity," he murmured, "that a woman with your history is permitted at a table such as this at all." She did not flinch, though 6 years of practice went into the stillness of her hands. "A pity," she returned evenly, "that a man's fortune so often excuses his manners from scrutiny." Bramwell's mouth thinned. He reached past her, seizing a footman's wrist hard enough that the boy's tray rattled. "Careful, you clumsy. Release him." Marigold's voice cut through the hall before she had decided to speak at all. The table fell silent. 6 years collapsed into one suspended, terrible second. The same words, nearly, that had ended her place in society once before. Bramwell released the footman, more from surprise than obedience. Across the table, Alaric was not looking at the scandal unfolding. He was looking at her, and there was nothing in his gray eyes resembling judgment, only a fierce, startled attention, as though he had just watched someone hand him the missing piece of an argument he'd been having with himself for days. "Miss Fenchurch," he said into the silence, "would you do me the honor of riding out with me tomorrow morning? I find I require a guide who is not afraid to speak plainly." Her father's expression suggested he might faint directly into the soup. Marigold lifted her chin. "I should be delighted, Your Highness." They rode further than propriety strictly allowed, though neither mentioned it. Alaric matched her pace easily, and when she finally slowed atop the ridge overlooking Larkspur's eastern fields, he reined in beside her without a word, simply watching the mist burn away from the valley below. "You ride like the land belongs to you," he said. "It doesn't. Not legally. Everything here belongs to my father, who has never once balanced its accounts correctly in his life." She hadn't meant to say it. The words had simply slipped loose, as words around this man seemed inclined to do. I manage the estate's books, in secret, better than our steward, though no one would ever admit it aloud. Why secret? Because a woman who is useful is far more dangerous to a family's pride than a woman who is merely disgraced. She glanced sideways. And I am, very thoroughly, both. He was quiet a long moment. In my country, he said finally, I am permitted to choose nothing of consequence. Not my friends, not my occupations, and very soon, not even the woman I am meant to marry. A treaty requires it. A princess from the south, whom I have met exactly once, for the duration of a formal supper. His jaw tightened. We are both, it seems, kept by people who call it protection. Something in Marigold loosened, dangerously, toward sympathy. Is that why you came today? To envy my small rebellions? I came today, he said, turning to look at her fully, because I have not stopped thinking of a woman who rode past a wrecked carriage, as though scandal could not touch her, and I find I would very much like to know if that was true, or merely brave pretending. Before she could answer, hooves sounded behind them. A rider in his household livery, face grim, a sealed letter held aloft. Your Highness. The messenger's voice carried clear across the quiet field. Word from Hesselmoor, urgent. Alaric did not move to take it immediately. His eyes stayed on Marigold a heartbeat longer, as though already mourning whatever the seal would cost them. The letter, Alaric told her later that evening, because he sought her out again, this time without pretense of accident, confirmed what he had long suspected and dreaded in equal measure. His father's council, citing a treaty older than Alaric himself, demanded he formalize a betrothal to Princess Liesel of the Southern Court within the year, or risk the alliance collapsing entirely. And what do you want? Marigold asked, seated across from him in Larkspur's small library, the air thick with old paper and tallow smoke. I have never once been asked that question by anyone who mattered. He said it plainly, without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. I find I do not entirely know how to answer it. Then I shall ask differently. What do you want tonight, in this room, with no council and no treaty watching? He looked at her for a long moment. Tonight, I want the truth you have not yet told me. So she told him, all of it. The ballroom 6 years past, the Marquis of Thornbury's casual cruelty toward a stable boy who could not defend himself, her own voice rising over 300 witnesses to call it what it was. The broken engagement that followed, her father's quiet, methodical erasure of her from society's notice, dressed up as delicate health. She expected pity. She had built 6 years of armor against pity. He gave her none of it. You were the only honest person in that ballroom, he said simply, and they punished you for it by trying to make you disappear. Something in her throat ached fiercely. Yes, I find, he said quietly, that I have very little patience left for people who punish honesty. A knock interrupted them, sharp, deliberate. The door opened before either could answer. Your Highness. A tall man in formal court dress stood in the doorway, his gaze cutting immediately to Marigold with cold, practiced disapproval. Count Drosden, at your service. Your father sent me the moment word reached him of your delay in Hampshire. Alaric's expression hardened into something Marigold had not yet seen on him. Count Drosden, he said evenly, you are unforgivably early. Count Drosden wasted no time with pleasantries. By breakfast he had requested a private audience with Viscount Fenchurch, and by mid-morning, Marigold understood precisely what had been discussed, because her father summoned her directly afterward with an expression she recognized from 6 years ago, the look of a man calculating costs. The Count believes, he said carefully, that your continued presence near His Highness could complicate a matter of considerable importance to the crown of Hesselmoor. The Count believes I am an inconvenience. The Count is not wrong to be cautious. A woman with your history, attached however loosely to a prince's name. Say it plainly, father. You are afraid I shall ruin something a second time. He did not deny it. She found Drosden himself in the garden an hour later, examining the roses with the air of a man auditing property he intended to seize. Miss Fenchurch. He did not bow. I understand congratulations are in order, regarding your resilience. 6 years of disgrace, and still you manage to insert yourself into matters of state. I have inserted myself into nothing, Count. I merely continue existing, which you appear to find offensive. His Highness has obligations that supersede momentary fascinations. A treaty, a succession, an entire country's stability. His eyes flicked over her, cataloguing every flaw he assumed her family had already catalogued first. Surely even a woman of your independence understands the difference between a flirtation and a future. I understand the difference perfectly, Count. I simply decline to assume which one this is, on your authority or anyone else's. His thin smile suggested she had confirmed every low opinion he'd arrived with. His Highness departs for Hesselmoor within the fortnight. Earlier, if I have any influence in the matter, which I assure you, Miss Fenchurch, I do. She held her ground until he left, and only once she was alone did her hands begin, finally, to tremble. Within the fortnight. Earlier, if he could manage it. She had 6 years of practice surviving being hidden away. She was far less practiced at surviving someone being taken away instead. They met that evening in the conservatory, ostensibly by accident, though neither pretended to believe it. Rain had begun lashing the glass panes by the time Alaric found her among the potted citrus trees, her shawl damp at the shoulders from a dash across the lawn. "Drosden spoke to you," he said. It wasn't a question. He was thorough about it. He is always thorough. It is, unfortunately, his only genuinely useful quality. Alaric moved closer, close enough that she could see the tightness around his eyes, the exhaustion of a man fighting a battle with no visible enemy to strike. "I am sorry. For all of it. For arriving in your life and immediately complicating it past recognition. You didn't complicate it, Your Highness. You merely revealed how complicated it already was." Thunder cracked, close enough to rattle the glass. She startled. He caught her elbow, steadying her, and neither of them moved to step back afterward. "I leave within the fortnight," he said quietly. "Drosden will see to it sooner if he can manage it. Then go." The words cost her more than she expected. "Marry your princess. Secure your treaty. It is, I imagine, what sensible people do. I have spent my entire life being sensible on behalf of a country that has never once asked what I wanted in return." His hand had not left her arm. "I find, lately, that I am developing a regrettable taste for being otherwise." The space between them had narrowed without either acknowledging it, until his breath stirred the damp hair at her temple, until the rain and the thunder and 6 years of careful armor seemed, suddenly, very far away and very unimportant. Marigold. The conservatory door banged open. Honora stood in the threshold, soaked through, eyes wide with urgent alarm. "Mary, you must come at once," she gasped. "Father has summoned Squire Bramwell's father. He means to have you betrothed by week's end, before the prince can complicate anything further." Her father's reasoning, delivered without apology the following morning, was simple and brutal. A hasty betrothal to a respectable widower would settle the Marigold problem permanently, remove any possibility of further scandal attaching to the prince's visit, and salvage whatever goodwill remained between their families and the crown of Hesselmoor. "It is for the family's good," he said, as he had said 6 years before, as though repetition might finally make it true. "It is for your comfort," she corrected. "There is a difference, and you have never once managed to see it." She did not weep. She did not retreat to her room to suffer quietly, as she had once been trained to do. Instead, she sat at her writing desk, long into the night, and wrote 2 letters. The first went to Squire Bramwell's father, declining, with perfect civility, an offer that had not yet technically been made, removing any possibility of her father announcing it as settled before she could object publicly. The second she addressed directly to Count Drosden. "You believe me an inconvenience to be managed," she wrote. "I believe you have mistaken a woman who has spent 6 years surviving her own family's machinations for one who will quietly submit to yours. I will not interfere with matters of treaty or succession, but I will not be disposed of either, not by my father, and not by you." She sealed it, and before dawn, she dressed in her riding habit, saddled her mare herself, and rode toward the village inn where she knew the prince's party had taken rooms. Not to beg, not to plead, but simply to be heard, finally, by someone with the power to listen. She did not know that Alaric, having spent the same sleepless night arriving at his own decision, had already mounted his horse an hour earlier and was riding, with equal determination, straight toward Larkspur Hall. 2 riders, cutting across the same misted fields from opposite directions, each certain the other needed rescuing. They met at the crossroads halfway between the inn and Larkspur Hall, both breathless, both soaked with morning dew, both so startled to find the other already in motion that neither spoke at first. "You were coming to me," Alaric said finally. "You were coming to me." Marigold held up the sealed letter, slightly crumpled from the ride. I had decided I would no longer wait to be rescued or disposed of. I intended to speak for myself. As did I. He produced his own letter, addressed to his father's council. I have refused the southern betrothal. Formally. In writing, Drosden will be apoplectic. You cannot simply refuse a treaty. I can refuse to be married for the convenience of men who have never once asked what I actually want. His gray eyes held hers, fierce and certain. I have spent my whole life being managed, Marigold. I no longer have the stomach for it. Hooves thundered behind them, Drosden, and close behind him, Viscount Fenchurch, both clearly having discovered the missing prince and missing daughter at roughly the same unfortunate hour. Your Highness, Drosden snapped, reining in hard. This is precisely the recklessness I warned. Count Drosden. Alaric's voice did not rise, but it silenced the man instantly. You will inform my father's council that the Southern Alliance is concluded by other means, or it is not concluded at all. That decision is mine, and I have made it. Her father's face had gone the color of old parchment. Marigold, you will return home immediately and, no, she said it the way she had said it 6 years before, in a crowded ballroom, except this time her voice did not shake, and this time no one moved to silence her. I am done being managed too, father. By you, by gossip, by anyone who finds my honesty inconvenient. Drosden looked between them, calculating, and found, for the first time, no leverage left to pull. Alaric dismounted, crossing the muddy crossroads to stand before her, heedless of the audience. Marigold Fenchurch, he said quietly, I cannot offer you a simple life. I can offer you a true one, beside a man who has finally chosen something for himself. Will you have it? She did not answer immediately, and to his credit, Alaric did not press her. He simply waited, rain dripping from his collar, while her father sputtered objections that no longer carried any weight, and Count Drosden stood rigid with the particular fury of a man watching his careful plans dissolve in the mud. 6 years, Marigold said finally. I have been told what I am permitted to want. Delicate, disgraced, useful only in secret. She studied him, the rain-soaked prince who had refused a treaty for her sake, who had looked at her ruin and called it honesty instead of shame. I find I am finished asking permission. Is that a yes, he asked, or merely a very long preamble to one? Despite everything, she laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind she had not allowed herself in 6 careful years. It is a yes, Your Highness. Though I warn you, I intend to keep managing my father's accounts, riding before dawn, and speaking precisely as plainly as I please. A crown will not alter that. I would be considerably less interested in you, he said, closing the last distance between them, if it did. He kissed her there at the crossroads, in full view of her sputtering father and Drosden's outraged silence. Not a careful, courtly gesture, but something fierce and certain. 6 years of being unseen, dissolving into the simple, astonishing fact of being chosen. Behind them, Honora let out a delighted whoop, entirely unbefitting a young lady's reputation. Viscount Fenchurch looked, for the first time in years, uncertain whether he had won or lost. Drosden, for his part, had already begun composing the furious letter he would send to Hesselmoor's council, though even he, watching the prince smile in a way none of his courtiers had ever witnessed, suspected the letter would change nothing at all. The betrothal was announced within the week, not as a treaty, not as a transaction, as a choice, the first either of them had ever been fully permitted to make. A year later, the villagers of Hampshire had grown accustomed to the sight of their princess riding out before dawn, skirts hitched indecently above her boots, laughing into the wind, as though scandal had never once touched her. It hadn't, not truly, not since the morning she'd stopped letting other people decide what counted as shame. Marigold still kept Larkspur's accounts, now alongside Hesselmoor's considerable treasury, much to the lasting horror and grudging admiration of Count Drosden, who had been quietly reassigned to oversee vineyards and complained about it at every available opportunity. Honora, freed at last from the burden of being the family's only acceptable daughter, had fallen happily and scandal-free in love with a botanist, and visited often enough that the two sisters had taken to running the local children's astronomy lessons together on clear nights. Viscount Fenchurch had never quite learned to apologize properly, but he had learned, eventually, to boast about his daughter's delicate constitution, with an entirely different and far more accurate meaning. And Alaric, crown prince, husband, a man who had once been managed by everyone but himself, still rode out to meet his wife most mornings, watching her cross the frost-silvered fields exactly as he had the first time, utterly unhidden, entirely herself, and impossible, now, for anyone to look away from. Marigold spent 6 years being hidden away, ignored, and told her voice didn't matter. If her story made you smile, cry, or believe in courage again, don't leave without subscribing. It takes only a second, but for this channel, it means the world. And honestly, after everything Marigold survived, she deserves one final victory from the people who stayed until the end.